It was the photograph on the invitation that first caught my attention. My granddaughter and her fiancé smiling broadly, their eyes shining as if they possessed the secret to eternal happiness. Underneath, a line in elegant script informed me that my presence was expected in a prominent role. I dutifully RSVP'd, picturing soft music, heartfelt vows, and a celebration of two young people embarking on a life together. I did not suspect that I would become the unwilling centerpiece of a spectacle more theatrical than any wedding I had attended in my 70-plus years. On the morning of the ceremony, I put on my best suit, a tailored number in charcoal gray that had fit me like a glove until recent months. I adjusted my tie before the mirror and practiced a gentle smile. I recalled how my daughter had insisted I bring a substantial gift, something befitting the grandeur of her daughter's plans. I withdrew an envelope from my wallet containing a check that represented more money than I cared to think about. I slipped it into the pocket of my suit jacket as I walked down the driveway, the sun filtering through ancient oak trees, casting long shadows over the manicured lawn. The sky was a pale blue, hinting at warmth but also offering a certain chill that matched my uneasy anticipation. When I arrived at the venue, a sprawling estate with marble columns and fountains trickling water as if whispering secrets, I found the guests milling about, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. The scent of peonies and roses from the garden mingled with the crisp air, creating an atmosphere that felt both idyllic and contrived. I saw my daughter near the entrance, dressed in a cream-colored gown that matched her penchant for ostentation. She waved to me, her expression cordial but her eyes betraying a calculation I had learned to recognize over the years. I embraced her briefly, offering heartfelt congratulations to her daughter, my granddaughter, who hugged me in return, her lips brushing my cheek with perfunctory affection. I wondered how many times she might turn to me for another check or another gadget or another favor in the years to come. I told myself to shelve these resentments today and focus on the ceremony, on celebrating a union that might or might not endure beyond the glitter and the champagne. I was determined to savor the moment, to pretend that all was well. As I approached the registration table, where a porter in a crisp uniform directed me to pick up my name tag, my heart sank. The young man handed me a lanyard with a plastic holder containing a piece of paper on which someone had written in bold black letters, "The Cash Cow." My eyes stung as if someone had flicked a switch and flooded the room with harsh light. I looked around, bewildered, hoping that I had misread it somehow. My daughter stood nearby, chatting with her friends, and when she caught my gaze, she offered a quick nod as if to say, "Yes, that's right." And behind her, my granddaughter smiled, her eyes dancing with a smugness that made my chest tighten. I forced myself to smile back, to remove the tag discreetly, rolling my eyes toward the ceiling but not saying a word. I clipped it back on the lanyard and let it swing against my chest, a public proclamation of how they perceived me, not as a family member deserving of respect, but as a bottomless wallet to be milked. The ceremony began on the lawn beneath an arch of white hydrangeas. I walked slowly to my seat, feeling the weight of that label more keenly than any garment I wore. The chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the arch, and I found myself seated in a prime position, directly between the families, as if I were a mediator whose sole purpose was to be admired and then exploited. The officiant, a well-dressed man with a gentle voice, began speaking about love, commitment, and partnership. My mind drifted to memories of my granddaughter as a child, her laughter echoing through our house, her tiny hands clutching my fingers as we walked to the park. I had spoilt her then with ice cream cones and toys, never imagining that she would grow into a young woman who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. The vows were exchanged gracefully. My granddaughter and her fiancé spoke of devotion and mutual respect, their words flowing like poetry. They held hands, looking at each other as if the rest of the world had fallen away. I blinked back tears, touched by their sincerity, or so I thought. After the final declaration, the crowd erupted in applause and they kissed. Flower petals rained down from flower girls overhead, drifting like snowflakes through the warm afternoon air. I clapped, along with everyone else, but inside I felt hollow, my applause forced and my mind replaying the mercy of their deception. Did they mean any of it? Or was the wedding merely a stage on which to showcase their ambition and display their ability to extract wealth from those who loved them? After the ceremony, the cocktail hour began. Silver trays crowded with appetizers circled the guests. I took a plate with smoked salmon canapes and a flute of champagne, chatting with relatives I hardly recognized through layers of ostentation. My cousin Richard marveled at my suit, remarking that I could have stepped out of a fashion magazine. I nodded politely, but he didn't seem to notice the name tag. I wished for a moment that I could disappear, to slip away without forfeiting my seat at dinner. But the lanyard hung heavy around my neck, a constant reminder that I was on display and that my role in this charade was both visible and essential. As the sun dipped lower and gold turned to pink in the sky, we were invited to move into the reception tent. It was an enormous white pavilion with crystal chandeliers, long tables draped in ivory linen, and centerpieces composed of white lilies and eucalyptus. The place cards were arranged in perfect order. I found my seat in the front, row of the maternal side, between my daughter and an aunt I barely spoke to anymore. The table assignment positioned me so that I faced my granddaughter directly. When I sat down, she shot me a grin that seemed rehearsed. I forced another smile and unfolded the menu card in front of me. It was printed on thick cardstock listing an appetizer of lobster bisque, a main course of filet mignon with truffle mashed potatoes, and a dessert of assorted petit fours. To be generous, the food was excellent, but each course felt like another reminder of the opulence that marked this event, a stark contrast to the modest home I had raised my granddaughter in until her teenage years. The toasts began. The best man stood first, delivering witty anecdotes about the groom's childhood. I sipped my champagne, nodding occasionally. When it was my daughter's turn to speak, she rose and tapped her glass for attention. She spoke of her daughter's journey from a curious little girl to the beautiful bride she saw before her. She praised the groom for finding someone who would make her daughter happy. I searched her face for sincerity, but all I saw was ambition. She spoke for 10 minutes, her words laced with praise but devoid of warmth. I tapped my fingers on the tablecloth, remembering the times I had helped her pay bills when she lost her job, the times I had lent her money to keep her car from being repossessed. I thought of my granddaughter's constant requests for designer clothes and lavish trips funded by my retirement savings. I wanted to stand, clear the room, and admit that I had grown resentful and wary of the affection that hid a demand. Before I could decide whether to speak up, the photographer called everyone to the dance floor. Couples twirled, and laughter echoed around the tent. My granddaughter danced with her new husband, swirling in a gown that shimmered like starlight. The silk of her dress rustled as they moved. I watched from my chair, sipping water now, trying to tell myself that I did not belong in this spectacle. Still, I remained seated, my name tag glinting under the chandelier, a beacon for anyone else who might wish to confirm my role as the family's ATM. The clinking of a fork against a wine glass drew my attention back to the table. My granddaughter was gazing at me with an arch expression, and her new husband leaned in to whisper something in her ear. I could not hear their words, but I felt the weight of their scrutiny. My daughter leaned over and placed a hand on my arm. She whispered, "I hope you enjoy the evening." Her tone was measured, almost polite. I nodded, and she withdrew, joining a group of aunts and uncles who discussed the flowers, the music, and whether the couple had requested too many napkins. I returned to my food, tasting the succulent prime rib, the sauce rich and savory, yet feeling as though each bite was dredged through bitter regret. Night descended, and lanterns hanging from the tent ceiling glowed like fireflies. A string quartet played softly in the corner as guests roamed the perimeter, clutching dessert plates and discussing the evening's events. I excused myself to the restrooms and paused in a corridor, staring at my reflection in a mirror. The TM name tag still dangled from my neck. Underneath its flimsy plastic, my soul felt bruised. I considered slipping into a taxi and vanishing into the night, but then I thought of the check in my pocket, the one I had been instructed to hand over at some point during the evening. My daughter and my granddaughter would expect it. They would see another opportunity to remind me of my worth being measured in dollars. The thought of handing them more money burned me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I returned to my seat, just as the DJ signaled that it was time for the bouquet toss. The bride stood in the center of the dance floor, turned away from the assembled women, and before she flung the bouquet, she glanced toward me, catching my eye. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. I felt a chill run down my spine. My granddaughter tossed the flowers over her shoulder. They arced through the air like white doves. A dozen eager young women reached up to catch them, and one friend of the bride emerged victorious. The crowd cheered. My granddaughter laughed as she walked off the dance floor, wiping a tear that had nothing to do with sentimentality. I wondered if part of her had recognized that I was no longer just an honored guest, but a check waiting to be written. The entire display felt choreographed to remind me of my vulnerability, my susceptibility to the allure of family love and obligation. I spent the next hour sipping decaf coffee, nibbling on petit fours, and making small talk with distant relatives who had no clue about the true dynamic at play. They spoke of my granddaughter's future, the house she and her new husband would purchase, and how grand of a grandmother I would have to be once great-grandchildren arrived. I nodded and smiled, feeling each compliment as a barb. I wanted to stand and tell them the truth, that my granddaughter's ambitions had always centered on gold digging, on securing a lifestyle financed by my dwindling savings. But I held my tongue because some battles could only be fought at home in private after the crowds had gone and the name tags had been collected. When the music died down and the lights dimmed, I saw my daughter approach with a champagne flute in hand. She took my arm and said something about how proud she was to have me there, how grateful her daughter was for my support. I forced a semblance of warmth and replied that I wished them all the best. She nodded, then walked away, leaving me alone at the edge of the dance floor. My granddaughter rejoined me a few moments later, touching my elbow gently. "Grandpa," she said, her voice soft, "thank you for coming, it means so much." My heart clenched. I took a deep breath and said, "I hope this evening has been everything you dreamed." She smiled wider and kissed my cheek. "It has, thanks to you." I felt a pang of pity for her ignorance, or maybe her hypocrisy. I wondered if she was capable of recognizing that the generosity she claimed to appreciate was, in her mind, just currency to be spent. Later, when the time came to give gifts, my daughter approached me with a leather folder. Inside was a card that read, "To the most generous grandfather with love." I opened it and found a sticker attached that read, "Your gift is a legacy." Underneath, a note instructed me to give a check to the couple at my earliest convenience. My daughter awaited my response, her eyes expectant. I folded the card slowly and closed it, refusing to let the sticker's message dictate my emotions. Instead, I rose from my seat, gathering my belongings. I approached her and whispered quietly, "I need a moment alone." She nodded, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. I stepped outside into the cool evening air and felt the hush of the night settle around me. Crickets chirped in the hedges, and I took a deep breath, letting the quiet restore some equilibrium to my mind. For a long time I stood beneath a magnolia tree, watching white petals drift in the breeze. I thought about all the times I had given, money for birthdays, college tuition, rent when they were between jobs, and how each gift had been met with a smile that masked a sense of entitlement. I thought about the angry surge in my chest, the humiliation of being labeled the cash cow, recognized by everyone at the table for my role in their conspicuous consumption. The realization hit me fully. These were not the people who deserved my devotion. They had turned love into a transaction, affection into a business deal. I could feel tears prickle at the edges of my eyes, but I let them fall, for they were my release. I resolved that this would be the last time I offered myself as a source of income. I would be grandfather to her when she needed advice or comfort, but I would no longer be her banking institution. Returning to the tent, I found my daughter waiting by the entrance, her expression blank. She took my arm and guided me to a corner table where the couple sat, counting cards they had received from other relatives. They exchanged quiet words with me, praising my presence and speaking in platitudes about my kindness. I smiled as best I could, and then reached into my pocket. The checkbook lay there, tempting me with its promise to maintain the charade. I closed my fingers around the cover and then withdrew my hand. My daughter's brow furrowed as I pulled the checkbook back and tucked it firmly away. I leaned in and said softly, "I cannot give you any more money." She looked shocked, then angry. "What do you mean?" she hissed. "This was an important gift, you promised." I shook my head. The gifts I have given in the past were out of love. This evening made it clear what you think of my love. I will always care for my granddaughter, but I will no longer be treated like a source of endless cash. My granddaughter stood, her face contorting with outrage. "You can't do this," she spat. "We need that money." I met her gaze, and for a moment she looked uncertain, as if she sensed that I had reclaimed my dignity. "You do not need it," I said. "You chose to marry someone who can stand on his own 2 feet. If you cannot manage your own finances, that is on you." My daughter joined my granddaughter in anger. They turned to each other as if to mount a joint offensive. I straightened, feeling a quiet resolve settle into my bones. "I love you both," I continued, "but love does not involve using people. I refuse to be used any longer." And without waiting for further protest, I stood and walked away. The journey home was a blur of streetlights and subtle thoughts. I sat in the passenger seat as my driver navigated through the city, my mind replaying scenes from the wedding. I thought about the gleaming tables, the laughter, the music, and how each element had been arranged to flatter one idea: that I was there to be admired only insofar as I could be instrumental in filling their coffers. I realized that I had been complicit in my own exploitation for too many years, letting affection for my family blind me to their greed. No more. If they chose to see me as a cash cow, they would have to find another herd to milk. When I arrived home, I sat in my armchair and stared at the floral arrangement my daughter had sent me afterward. The vase held white roses and lilies, delicate blooms that suggested sympathy. A card attached read, "We understand your decision and hope you will reconsider." I placed the card down and let the flowers catch the moonlight streaming through the window. I felt stronger than I had in weeks. The house was quiet, the city noises muted. I made a cup of tea, sipping it slowly, savoring the warmth as it traveled through me. Over the next days, I reconsidered my relations with my daughter and granddaughter. I opted not to call or text. I wondered if they would reach out with apologies or explanations, maybe invitations to dinner to discuss an emotional resolution. But the nights passed and I heard nothing. After the initial silence, I felt a sense of relief rather than heartache. I understood that some relationships must be put on hold until respect is restored. I contacted my lawyer and asked about setting up trust guidelines that would protect my assets and only release portions of them to my granddaughter upon certain milestones, like completion of her degree or evidence of gainful employment. The lawyer advised drafting a formal arrangement and I agreed, relieved to have a legal framework to prevent emotional blackmail. Weeks later, on a drizzly afternoon, I received a call from my granddaughter. She sounded tentative, her voice quieter than I remembered. "Grandpa," she said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." "I'm sorry for the way I behaved. I didn't realize how I hurt you." I paused before answering, surprised by the sincerity I heard. "I appreciate your apology," I replied. "I hope you understand that I cared about you enough to step away and make you recognize that there's more to me than a check." She hesitated and then admitted that she had been feeling guilty, that her excitement over the wedding had blinded her to my feelings. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, but I made it clear that things would be different. I expected respect for my boundaries, and financial requests would be considered only under the guidelines we had discussed with my lawyer. She said she understood, and I believed her. We met at a small cafe near my home. She offered a small bouquet of daisies, simple flowers that contrasted with the extravagant arrangements at her wedding. She had tears in her eyes when she presented them. "These are for you," she said. "They're not expensive, but I hope they show how much I care." I accepted them and inhaled the sweet, clean scent. We talked for almost 2 hours, discussing her new life, her dreams, and the pressure she felt to maintain an image of success. She admitted that she had been terrified of disappointing people if she didn't keep up with luxury. I listened, gently reminding her that true success came from character and values, not from designer labels and grand gestures. I could see a softness returning to her features, a glimmer of the sincere child I once knew. In the months that followed, our relationship took on a new shape. I visited her apartment, smaller than the house she'd always dreamed of, but warm and filled with thrifted treasures that suited her personality. She had taken a job teaching elementary school music, a position that paid modestly but gave her joy. She spoke passionately about her students, about the love she found in helping children find their voices. I felt pride swell in my chest. She no longer asked for money except for occasional support toward her continuing education. I agreed to help, but within measured limits we established together. Each time I handed her a check for tuition, she thanked me sincerely, without that familiar sense of entitlement. One afternoon, when I was visiting, she handed me a gift box wrapped in brown paper and twine. I opened it slowly and found inside a framed photograph. It was a candid shot of her and me from years ago, standing in the backyard as she blew bubbles while I held her close, both of us laughing. I stared at the image, seeing myself through, her younger eyes innocent and unassuming. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I lost sight of what really matters. You were always there for me, not just with money, but with love. I want to make sure you know how much I value that." I felt my throat tighten and tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I told her that seeing this picture meant more to me than any check ever would. As the seasons changed, I found myself looking forward to our visits. We attended local concerts, tried new recipes together, and chatted on the phone weekly about the trivialities of daily life. My granddaughter and I rediscovered the bond we once shared, untainted by financial expectation. My daughter, observing from a distance, seemed to soften as well, though we maintained a respectful space when it came to discussing money. I realized that generosity could take many forms: patience, unconditional support, sharing experiences, and setting healthy boundaries. The money I gave would now serve as a foundation for her growth, not a crutch for misguided ambitions. A year after the wedding, I attended my granddaughter's first school recital, where she conducted a children's choir in What a Wonderful World. I sat in the auditorium, tears brimming as I watched her stand tall, baton in hand, guiding young voices in harmony. She turned to me once during the performance and smiled, a simple, genuine expression that carried love and gratitude. In that moment, I understood that restoring our relationship had required firm resolve and honest confrontation, but it had also opened the door to a deeper, more authentic connection. The name tag they had pinned to me that day was no longer a label that defined me. It was a lesson that revealed how love could be tainted by expectation and how boundaries could restore dignity. Years later, as we gathered for my 80th birthday, my granddaughter surprised me with a scrapbook. It was filled with photographs and mementos, snapshots of our fishing trip when she was 10, tickets from the symphony we attended together, handwritten notes from holidays past. There was a page dedicated to that wedding day, an empty space around a small folded name tag with the words "The Cash Cow" crossed out in red biro. Above it, she had written, a reminder that nothing can define our love but our actions. I closed my eyes and pressed my hand to my heart, overcome by emotion. In every frame, every note, and every ticket stub, I saw the journey we had traveled. From misplaced affection to understanding, from silence to reconciliation. I realized that family could be both fragile and resilient. They could wound you with expectation and guilt, but they could also heal you with honesty and grace. My granddaughter's wedding had been a crucible, forging our relationship into something stronger. The wound of being labeled had left a scar, but that scar reminded me of my own worth beyond the dollar sign. I emerged from that experience with a renewed sense of purpose, to give love freely but wisely, to cherish relationships by holding fast to my values. And in that space I found peace. A peace forged not by the absence of conflict but by the courage to confront it. Looking back, the name tag now feels like a distant echo, once a bitter brand, now a testament to my own growth. I no longer see myself as just a provider of funds. I am a grandfather, a mentor, a friend. I am the keeper of memories, the giver of advice, the listener of secrets. My legacy is not measured by the checks I wrote, but by the lives I touched, the lessons I taught, and the love I shared. And as I sit in my study, surrounded by photographs and letters, I know that the most precious gift I will ever receive is the knowledge that I am valued for who I am, far beyond the label that was pinned to my chest on that unforgettable wedding day.